This bear was raised by 3 dogs and thinks he's a dog. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning mist clung to the valleys like a soft blanket as Connor Adams stepped out of his weathered cabin, coffee mug in hand. He paused on the wooden porch, listening to the familiar sounds that had become his daily symphony. 3 dogs were wrestling in the yard, their playful growls mixing with the chirping of birds. But there was something else, something that still made visitors do a double take when they first saw it. A young bear, no bigger than a large dog, was right in the middle of the chaos, rolling around with his 3 canine siblings. Bruno, as Connor had named him, was playfighting with Rex, a golden retriever, while Bella, the border collie, nipped at his ears. Max, the German shepherd, circled them all with his tail wagging. Connor smiled, remembering the day 6 months ago when everything had changed. He had been checking his fence line when he heard the crying. It was a sound that pierced through the forest, desperate and lonely. Following the noise, he found Bruno, barely the size of a house cat, curled up beside a fallen tree. His mother was nowhere to be found. The 3 dogs had been Connor's companions for years on this isolated property, 20 miles from the nearest town. When he brought the tiny cub home, he expected them to be curious, maybe even protective. He never expected them to adopt Bruno as their own. Bruno had learned everything from his dog brothers and sister. He would scratch at the door when he wanted inside, sleep curled up in the dog bed pile, and even tilt his head to the side when Connor spoke to him. The strangest part was the barking. Bruno couldn't quite manage a proper bark, but he made a huffing sound that was his version of joining the conversation. "Come on, you 4 troublemakers," Connor called out, setting his empty mug on the porch railing. "Breakfast time." The dogs immediately ran toward him, tails wagging wildly. Bruno followed, his gait slightly different, but his enthusiasm identical. Connor had built a special feeding area for all 4 animals, with Bruno's portion adjusted for his unique dietary needs. As they ate, Connor noticed Rex kept looking toward the forest edge. The golden retriever's ears were perked up, and his body was tense. Bella and Max seemed to sense it too, their eating slowing as they lifted their heads to scan the tree line. Bruno, oblivious to the tension, finished his food and padded over to Connor, nuzzling against his leg the way the dogs did when they wanted attention. Connor scratched behind Bruno's ears, feeling the coarse fur that was so different from his dog's soft coats. Yet Bruno seemed to expect the same treatment. "What's got you all worked up?" Connor asked Rex, who had stopped eating entirely and was now standing at attention, facing the woods. That's when Connor heard it too, the sound of branches breaking, heavy footsteps that didn't belong to any of the usual forest creatures. Someone was coming through the woods, and they weren't being careful about staying quiet. The 3 dogs immediately moved into a protective formation around Bruno, who looked confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. He tried to play Bo at Max, thinking this was a new game, but the German shepherd remained focused on the approaching sounds. Connor's stomach tightened. Very few people knew about this property, and even fewer knew about Bruno. He had been careful to keep the young bear's existence quiet, knowing that if the wrong people found out, it could mean trouble for all of them. The footsteps were getting closer now, accompanied by voices. Connor counted at least 3 different men talking in low tones. His heart began to race as he realized they were carrying equipment, the metallic clanking giving them away. Bruno, still not understanding the danger, let out his signature huffing bark, trying to get the other dogs to play with him. The sound echoed across the clearing, and Connor watched in horror as the voices in the forest went completely silent. They had heard Bruno, and now they knew exactly where to find them. Connor's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, broken only by the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Rex was growling now, a low rumble that started deep in his chest. Bella had moved closer to Bruno, her body pressed against his side as if trying to shield him. Max positioned himself between the forest and the group, his hackles raised. Then the voices started again, but this time they were urgent, excited. Connor caught fragments of their conversation drifting through the trees. "Did you hear that sound? That wasn't a dog. Could be a coyote, maybe a wolf." "No, that was something else. Something bigger." Connor felt sick to his stomach. He had always known this day might come, but he had hoped it never would. He looked down at Bruno, who was now sitting like the other dogs, his head tilted in confusion as he tried to understand why everyone was so tense. The young bear had no idea he was different. To him, Connor was his human, and Rex, Bella, and Max were his littermates. He had never seen another bear, never learned to hunt like his wild cousins. He played fetch, came when called, and even tried to shake hands like the dogs did when Connor asked for their paw. "Stay close to me," Connor whispered to all four animals, his voice barely audible. He slowly backed toward the cabin, hoping to get them all inside before whoever was in the forest made their appearance. But it was too late. 3 men emerged from the tree line, and Connor's worst fears were confirmed. They were carrying rifles and wearing camouflage gear. Hunters. The kind of men who would see Bruno not as a gentle soul raised by dogs, but as a dangerous wild animal that needed to be eliminated. The lead hunter, a tall man with a graying beard, stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the scene in front of him. His eyes went wide as he took in the sight of Bruno, sitting calmly among the 3 dogs, his tail wagging in what he had learned was the universal sign of friendliness. "What in the hell?" the bearded man muttered, lowering his rifle slightly but not putting it away entirely. The second hunter, younger with nervous energy, kept his weapon raised. "That's a bear, Jim. A goddamn bear just sitting there like it's a pet." The third man, heavy-set with suspicious eyes, shook his head in disbelief. "I've been hunting these mountains for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Connor stepped forward, trying to keep his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "Gentlemen, I need you to lower your weapons. These animals are not a threat to you." The bearded hunter Jim studied Connor carefully. "Are you telling me you've got a bear living with your dogs? That's impossible, mister. Bears are wild animals, dangerous." Bruno, hearing the conversation and seeing new people, did what he had been taught to do when visitors came. He stood up and walked toward the hunters, his tail still wagging, wanting to greet them the way he had learned was polite. The young hunter's finger moved to his trigger. "It's coming toward us. Jim, we need to take the shot." "Wait!" Connor shouted, stepping between Bruno and the hunters. "He's not wild. He's been raised with dogs since he was a cub. He thinks he's a dog. He won't hurt you." But Bruno, confused by the shouting and the tension in the air, let out another one of his huffing barks. To the hunters it sounded like a threat. To Connor and the dogs, it was Bruno asking what was wrong and why everyone seemed upset. The young hunter's face went pale. "Did you hear that? It's warning us. It's going to attack." Rex, sensing the danger to his adopted brother, stepped forward and began barking at the hunters. His bark was joined by Bella and Max, creating a chorus of protective sounds that filled the clearing. They formed a semicircle around Bruno, their message clear: they would defend him with their lives. Bruno, still not understanding the gravity of the situation, tried to calm his dog siblings by nuzzling against Rex and licking Bella's face. He had learned that this usually worked when the dogs were agitated about something. Jim, the lead hunter, watched this interaction with growing amazement. "I'll be damned. The bear is trying to calm the dogs down. Look at that." The heavy-set hunter squinted at the scene. "That's not normal behavior for a bear. Something's not right here." Connor saw his chance and took it. "His name is Bruno. I found him as a tiny cub 6 months ago. His mother was killed, probably by poachers. The dogs adopted him, and he's been living as part of their pack ever since." He gestured toward the animals, his voice becoming more confident as he spoke. "Watch him. Really watch him. He doesn't behave like a wild bear because he's never been wild. He's been domesticated, socialized with dogs and humans his entire life." As if to prove Connor's point, Bruno suddenly ran toward the porch and came back with a tennis ball in his mouth. He dropped it at Connor's feet and sat down, looking up expectantly with his tongue hanging out, just like the dogs did when they wanted to play fetch. The 3 hunters stared in stunned silence. The young one slowly lowered his rifle. It brought you a ball?" Connor picked up the ball and threw it across the yard. Bruno bounded after it with the same enthusiasm as any dog, his movements playful and carefree. When he brought it back, he dropped it and waited for Connor to throw it again. But just as the tension seemed to be easing, another sound came from the forest. This one made Connor's blood run cold. It was a low, rumbling growl that spoke of something much larger and more dangerous than Bruno. All 4 animals immediately went on high alert. Rex, Bella, and Max began backing toward the cabin, their tails tucked and their bodies low to the ground. But Bruno's reaction was different. He stood perfectly still, his head raised and his nostrils flaring as he caught a scent that triggered something deep in his genetic memory. The growl came again, closer this time, and Connor realized with growing horror what was happening. Bruno's real mother hadn't been killed by poachers. She had been searching for her cub all this time, and now she had found him. A massive female bear emerged from the forest, easily twice the size of Bruno. Her eyes were fixed on her offspring, and her posture radiated both protectiveness and fury. She had caught the scent of humans and dogs mixed with her cub's scent, and her maternal instincts were screaming danger. The 3 hunters immediately raised their rifles again, but this time Connor knew they might actually need them. This wasn't a gentle, domesticated bear raised by dogs. This was a wild animal defending her young. Bruno took a step toward his mother, recognition flickering in his eyes for the first time. Some ancient memory was stirring, telling him that this massive creature was connected to him in a way the dogs never could be. But Rex, Bella, and Max weren't about to let their brother go without a fight. They positioned themselves between Bruno and the wild bear, their barks turning aggressive as they faced down an opponent that could kill all 3 of them without breaking a sweat. The mother bear reared up on her hind legs, towering over them all, and let out a roar that shook the leaves on the trees. This was no longer a heartwarming story about unlikely friendships. This had become a matter of life and death for everyone in that clearing. Connor's hands were shaking as he watched the standoff unfold. The mother bear was enormous, her claws gleaming in the morning sunlight as she swayed on her hind legs. Her eyes were locked on Bruno, but Connor could see her calculating the threat posed by the dogs and humans surrounding her cub. Bruno stood frozen between 2 worlds. His dog family was behind him, barking frantically, trying to protect him from what they saw as a threat. His biological mother was in front of him, calling to him with sounds he had never heard before, but somehow understood in his bones. The young hunter's voice cracked with fear. "Jim, We need to take the shot now. That thing will kill us all." But Jim held up his hand, his experienced eyes studying the situation. "Hold on, Danny. Something's not adding up here." The mother bear dropped back down to all fours and took a step closer. Rex immediately lunged forward, positioning himself directly between her and Bruno. The golden retriever was trembling with fear, but his loyalty to his adopted brother overrode his survival instincts. What happened next shocked everyone in the clearing. Bruno let out a sharp whine and gently pushed Rex aside with his snout. Then he walked slowly toward his mother, his movements uncertain but determined. "No, Bruno," Connor whispered, his heart breaking as he watched. "Come back, boy." But Bruno had made his choice. He approached the massive bear cautiously, the way he had learned to approach the dogs when they were eating or sleeping. The mother bear lowered her massive head and sniffed her cub, her aggressive posture softening slightly. For a moment, it seemed like Bruno was going to go with her. He pressed against her side the way he did with the dogs, and she rumbled low in her throat, a sound that was almost like purring. Then something unexpected happened. Bruno looked back at Connor and the dogs, and his body language changed. He stepped away from his mother and walked back toward his chosen family, his tail wagging in that distinctive way that meant he was trying to communicate something important. The mother bear's confusion was visible. She followed her cub a few steps, then stopped when the dogs began barking again. Bruno positioned himself between his two families, looking back and forth as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Connor realized what Bruno was trying to do, and it made his chest tight with emotion. The young bear was trying to introduce his families to each other. In his innocent mind, there was no reason why everyone couldn't get along. Bruno walked back to his mother and gently nudged her forward with his head. Then he returned to Rex and did the same thing, trying to bring them together. His huffing bark filled the air as he tried to explain something that none of them could understand. The heavy-set hunter lowered his rifle completely. "Would you look at that? The little guy is trying to make peace." But the mother bear was having none of it. She could smell the human scent all over her cub, and every instinct told her that these creatures had stolen her baby. She let out another roar, this one directed at Connor, and began advancing toward him. The three dogs immediately sprang into action. Rex, Bella, and Max formed a protective wall in front of Connor, their barks becoming more aggressive and desperate. They were prepared to die defending their human, even against an opponent they had no chance of defeating. Bruno panicked. His two families were about to fight, and he couldn't understand why. He ran between them, his distressed whines growing louder as he tried to stop what seemed inevitable. That's when Connor noticed something that changed everything. The mother bear was limping. Her left rear leg was dragging slightly, and there was matted fur around what looked like an old wound. She wasn't just protecting her cub, she was injured and desperate. "She's hurt," Connor said aloud, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Look at her leg, she's been injured for a while." Jim studied the bear more carefully and nodded grimly. Probably caught in a trap. Happens more than people think. She might have been unable to hunt properly. That's why she left the cub in the first place. The revelation hit Connor like a physical blow. Bruno's mother hadn't abandoned him. She had hidden him somewhere safe while she tried to heal from her injury, planning to come back for him. But by the time she was strong enough to return, her cub was gone. Bruno seemed to sense his mother's pain. He approached her again, this time more gently, and began licking at her injured leg. It was the same behavior he showed when one of the dogs was hurt or upset. The mother bear stood perfectly still, allowing her cub to tend to her wound. The sight was so touching that even Danny, the nervous young hunter, had to wipe his eyes. I've never seen anything like this in my life. But their moment of peace was shattered by the sound of more voices coming from the forest. Connor's heart sank as he realized more hunters were approaching, drawn by the sound of the roaring and barking. "Jim! Danny, what's all the commotion about?" A voice called from the trees. "Stay back!" Jim shouted toward the forest. "We've got a situation here." But it was too late. 4 more hunters emerged from the woods, their weapons ready. When they saw the scene in the clearing, a massive wild bear, 3 dogs, and what they assumed was a domestic bear, their reaction was immediate and violent. "Holy hell, there are 2 bears!" one of them shouted. "Take them down before they attack," another yelled. The new arrivals raised their rifles, and Connor knew that this time there would be no talking them out of it. These men saw only wild animals and potential threats. They didn't see Bruno's gentle nature or his mother's desperation. Bruno's mother sensed the new danger immediately. Her protective instincts kicked into overdrive, and she positioned herself between the new hunters and her cub, her massive frame blocking their line of sight. But Bruno, loyal to his dog family until the end, refused to hide behind his mother. He moved to stand beside Rex, Bella, and Max, facing down the hunters with the same courage his canine siblings had shown. The 4 animals stood together, 3 dogs and 1 bear who thought he was a dog, ready to defend each other and their human. The sight was both beautiful and heartbreaking, knowing that their loyalty might cost them their lives. Connor stepped forward, placing himself between the animals and the new hunters. "Please, you don't understand. These animals aren't dangerous. The bear was raised by my dogs. He's not wild." But one of the new hunters, a man with cold eyes and a scarred face, wasn't interested in explanations. "Bears are bears, mister. Wild animals belong in the wild or in the ground." He raised his rifle and took aim at Bruno's mother, his finger moving toward the trigger. Connor watched in slow motion as the scene unfolded, knowing he was about to witness a tragedy that would destroy everything he held dear. That's when Bruno did something that no one expected. He stepped away from the dogs and walked directly toward the hunter with the raised rifle. But instead of approaching aggressively, he sat down right in front of the man and tilted his head to the side, the same gesture he used when he wanted Connor to pet him. The hunter's hand trembled as he stared down at the young bear who was looking up at him with complete trust. Bruno's tail was wagging, and he let out a soft huffing sound that was his version of a friendly greeting. "What the hell?" the scarred hunter muttered, his rifle wavering. Bruno then did something that brought tears to Connor's eyes. He reached out with one paw and gently touched the hunter's boot, the same gesture he used to ask for attention from the dogs when they were ignoring him. The clearing fell completely silent, except for the sound of Bruno's gentle huffing as he tried to make a new friend. Even the mother bear had stopped growling, watching her cub with what could only be described as pride. But just as it seemed like Bruno's innocent gesture might save them all, a new sound cut through the air. It was the distant howl of wolves, and it was getting closer. The forest around them was about to become even more dangerous, and Bruno's simple act of trust had inadvertently put everyone in the clearing at risk. The pack was hunting, and they had caught the scent of all the animals gathered in one place. What had started as a confrontation between humans and bears was about to become a fight for survival against predators that showed no mercy to anyone, human or animal alike. The wolf howls grew closer, and Connor could see the fear in everyone's eyes. Even the most experienced hunters knew that a wolf pack was something entirely different from facing a single bear or a few domestic dogs. Wolves hunted in coordinated attacks, using intelligence and teamwork that could overwhelm even armed humans. Bruno's ears perked up at the sound, and for the first time since Connor had known him, The young bear displayed behavior that was purely wild. His hackles rose, and he let out a low growl that sounded nothing like his playful huffing bark. This was the sound of a predator recognizing another predator. The scarred hunter, who had been aiming at Bruno's mother, quickly shifted his attention toward the forest. "How many you think there are, Jim?" Jim was already scanning the tree line, his experienced eyes searching for movement. "Could be anywhere from 4 to 12. Hard to tell from the howls." Bruno's mother had gone completely rigid, her massive head swiveling toward the sound. The injury to her leg suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the threat approaching from the woods. She moved closer to her cub, positioning herself so she could protect him from any direction. Rex, Bella, and Max were whimpering now, their canine instincts telling them that wolves were their ancient enemies. But instead of running, they pressed closer to Bruno, their loyalty overriding their fear. Connor's heart swelled with pride, even as terror gripped him. "We need to get inside," Connor said, his voice urgent. "My cabin's got thick walls and a solid door. We can wait them out." But Danny, the young hunter, shook his head frantically. "There's no way that bear is coming inside with us. She'll kill us all in that confined space." "Then we leave her out here to face the wolves alone?" Connor demanded. "She's injured. She won't stand a chance." The first wolf appeared at the edge of the clearing, a massive gray predator with yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the dappled sunlight. It was soon joined by another, then another. Connor counted 6 wolves total, each one bigger and more intimidating than the last. The pack leader, a black wolf with distinctive white markings on its chest, studied the group in the clearing with calculating intelligence. Connor realized that the wolves weren't just hunting randomly. They had been tracking the bear's scent and had found a situation they could exploit. Bruno stepped forward, placing himself between the wolves and his dog siblings. His posture had changed completely from the playful companion Connor knew. This was a bear ready to fight. His powerful muscles tensed and his claws extended. But what happened next surprised everyone. Rex, despite his obvious terror, moved to stand beside Bruno. Then Bella joined them, followed by Max. The 3 dogs and 1 bear formed a defensive line, ready to face the wolf pack together. The pack leader tilted its head, studying this unusual alliance. Wolves were intelligent enough to recognize that something was different about this situation. Dogs and bears didn't typically fight side by side. "They're confused," Jim whispered, his voice barely audible. "The wolves don't know what to make of this." Bruno's mother limped forward to join the defensive line, and Connor watched in amazement as she positioned herself so that her injured leg was protected by Bruno's body. Even in this moment of extreme danger, the family bonds were clear. The scarred hunter raised his rifle again, but this time he was aiming at the wolves. "I've got a clear shot at the pack leader." "Don't," Connor said sharply. "If you wound him without killing him, the whole pack will attack at once. We need a better plan." That's when Connor remembered something crucial. In the cabin, he had an emergency flare gun that he used to signal for help when he was injured or lost in the mountains. The bright light and loud noise might be enough to scare off the wolves without starting a firefight. "Cover me," Connor said to the hunters. "I'm going to get something from the cabin that might help." He started moving slowly toward the porch, but the wolves immediately responded to his movement. 2 of them began circling toward him, cutting off his path to the cabin door. Bruno saw the danger to his human and let out a roar that was deeper and more menacing than anything Connor had ever heard from him. The young bear charged toward the wolves, threatening Connor, his dog siblings right behind him. The clearing exploded into chaos. The wolf pack scattered at first, surprised by the aggressive response, but quickly regrouped. The pack leader let out a howl that seemed to coordinate the attack, and the wolves began moving in from multiple directions. Bruno caught the first wolf that tried to reach Connor, his powerful jaws clamping down on the predator's shoulder. The wolf yelped in pain and twisted away, but not before Bruno's claws raked across its side. Rex, Bella, and Max worked as a team, just as they had been trained to do when hunting rabbits on the property. They surrounded a second wolf, barking and snapping, keeping it off balance and preventing it from joining the main attack. Bruno's mother, despite her injury, proved that she was still a formidable opponent. When two wolves tried to flank the group, she reared up on her hind legs and brought her massive paws down on one of them, sending it tumbling across the clearing. The hunters were firing now, the crack of rifles echoing through the forest. Jim's shot took down the pack leader, while Danny managed to wound another wolf that was trying to circle behind them. But the battle was far from over. The remaining wolves, now desperate and angry, pressed their attack with increased ferocity. One of them broke through the defensive line and headed straight for Connor, who was still trying to reach the cabin. Connor stumbled backward, knowing he had no chance of outrunning the wolf. He could see its bared fangs and yellow eyes fixed on him with deadly intent. This was how his story would end, torn apart by a predator while the animals he loved fought desperately to save him. But Bruno was faster than anyone had anticipated. The young bear intercepted the wolf in mid-leap, the two animals colliding with bone-crushing force just feet from Connor. They rolled across the ground, a tangle of fur and claws and snapping teeth. Connor watched in horror as Bruno fought for both their lives. The young bear was strong, but he lacked the killer instinct of a true predator. The wolf was smaller but more experienced in life-or-death combat. Just when it seemed like the wolf might get the upper hand, Rex appeared like a golden blur. The retriever launched himself at the wolf's exposed throat, his jaws locking on with grim determination. The wolf's struggles became weaker, then stopped altogether. Bruno stood up slowly, blood on his fur but very much alive. He looked at Rex with something that could only be described as gratitude, then turned to check on his human. The clearing had gone quiet except for the heavy breathing of the survivors. 3 wolves lay dead, while the other 3 had retreated into the forest, their howls now distant and fading. But the victory had come at a cost. Bella was limping badly, blood seeping from claw marks on her leg. Max had a bite wound on his shoulder that would need immediate attention. Even Bruno was favoring one paw, and his mother's injury seemed to have worsened during the fight. Connor knelt beside his injured animals, his hands shaking as he tried to assess their wounds. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're all heroes, every single one of you." The hunters stood in stunned silence, their weapons lowered. They had just witnessed something that defied everything they thought they knew about the natural world. Dogs and bears fighting side by side, protecting each other and their human with a loyalty that transcended species. But their moment of relief was short-lived. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the forest, and Connor realized that the gunshots had attracted attention. Multiple engines were heading their way, and from the sound of them, they weren't friendly visitors. Jim's face went pale as he recognized the distinctive rumble of the engines. Those are government vehicles, Fish and Wildlife Service, probably with backup from the sheriff's department. The scarred hunter cursed under his breath. Someone must have reported the gunshots. They'll want to know why we were shooting in a restricted area. Connor's heart sank as he realized what this meant. When the authorities arrived and saw Bruno, they wouldn't see a gentle soul raised by dogs. They would see an illegal, exotic pet, a dangerous wild animal that needed to be removed from human contact. Bruno would be taken away, probably to a zoo or wildlife preserve where he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, never understanding why he had been separated from his family. The thought was more than Connor could bear. The engines were getting closer now, and Connor could see dust clouds rising through the trees. He had maybe 5 minutes before the authorities arrived, and everything he cared about was destroyed. But as he looked at Bruno, still standing protectively over his injured dog siblings, Connor realized that the young bear had already made his choice. When the wolves had attacked, Bruno hadn't run to his mother or tried to escape into the wild. He had stayed to fight for his chosen family. Now, Connor had to make a choice of his own, and it would determine the fate of everyone he loved. The vehicles were close enough now that he could hear doors slamming and voices shouting orders. Time was running out, and whatever decision he made in the next few minutes would change all their lives forever. The first uniformed officer emerged from the trees, and Connor saw his hand move instinctively toward his sidearm when he spotted the bears. This was the moment of truth, and Connor prayed that somehow, some way, love would be enough to overcome fear and bureaucracy. Officer Sarah Mitchell from the Fish and Wildlife Service stepped into the clearing, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. 3 dead wolves, injured dogs, 2 bears, and 7 men with rifles created a tableau that defied easy explanation. Her hand remained on her weapon, but she didn't draw it. "Everyone step away from the animals," she commanded, her voice authoritative but not panicked. "We have reports of illegal hunting and endangered species violations." Connor's heart hammered against his ribs as he remained kneeling beside his injured animals. Bruno, sensing his human's distress, moved closer and gently nuzzled Connor's shoulder, the same comforting gesture he had learned from watching the dogs. Officer Mitchell's partner, a younger man named Rodriguez, appeared behind her with his weapon already drawn. "Ma'am, that bear is too close to the civilian. We need to tranquilize it immediately." "Wait," Connor said, his voice cracking with desperation. "Please, just let me explain what happened here." But Officer Mitchell's attention had shifted to something else entirely. Her trained eyes were examining the wolf carcasses, and her expression changed from caution to confusion. "These wolves have been shot, but the bite patterns on them. They weren't killed by bullets alone." She approached one of the dead wolves carefully, kneeling to examine the wounds. "The throat wound on this one is from canine teeth, but the spacing is wrong for these dogs. And these claw marks—" She looked up at Bruno's mother, who was standing protectively over her cub. Jim, the lead hunter, stepped forward with his hands raised. "Officer, I can explain everything. We were tracking deer when we stumbled into this situation. The wolves attacked everyone, humans and animals alike. We all fought together to survive." Rodriguez scoffed. "You expect us to believe that bears and dogs fought alongside humans against wolves? Come on." That's when Bruno did something that stopped everyone in their tracks. He walked over to the dead wolf that Rex had helped him kill and sat down beside it, then looked up at Officer Mitchell and let out his distinctive huffing bark. Not aggressive, but communicative, as if he was trying to tell her a story. Officer Mitchell found herself staring into Bruno's eyes, and what she saw there wasn't the wild emptiness of a predator. There was intelligence, yes, but also something else, a gentleness that seemed impossible in a bear. "Rodriguez, lower your weapon," she said quietly. "Ma'am, protocol states—" "I said lower it." Her voice carried authority that brooked no argument. "This bear isn't displaying aggressive behavior. Look at its body language." Bruno, as if understanding that this woman might be different from the others, approached Officer Mitchell slowly. When he was close enough, he did something that made her breath catch in her throat. He sat down and offered her his paw, the same trick Connor had taught him to do for visitors. Rodriguez's gun wavered as he watched in disbelief. In 20 years of wildlife enforcement, he had never seen anything like this. But their moment of wonder was interrupted by the arrival of more vehicles. Sheriff's deputies, animal control officers, and what looked like a news van were all converging on Connor's property. The situation was spiraling out of control. Sheriff Tom Bradley emerged from the lead vehicle with a grim expression. He was a local man who had known Connor for years, but his official duties came first. "Connor, I need you to step away from those animals. We've got reports of illegal exotic pet ownership and public endangerment." "Tom, you know me," Connor pleaded. "I would never endanger anyone. These animals saved our lives." But Sheriff Bradley's attention was caught by something else entirely. A woman with a press badge and a camera crew was setting up equipment at the edge of the clearing. How the hell did the media find out about this already? The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Jessica Brooks, was already filming. This is Jessica Brooks reporting live from what appears to be an unprecedented wildlife encounter. We're seeing bears and domestic dogs coexisting in ways that challenge everything we know about animal behavior. Connor felt sick as he realized what was happening. This story was about to go viral, and once that happened, there would be no hiding Bruno from the world. Government agencies, wildlife experts, and curiosity seekers would descend on his peaceful property like locusts. Bruno, confused by all the new people and sensing Connor's distress, began to pace back and forth. His mother, equally agitated, let out a low, warning growl that made several of the newcomers step back nervously. That's when Officer Mitchell made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of calling for backup or demanding the bears be tranquilized, she approached Connor directly. "Mr. Adams, I need you to tell me exactly how long you've had these animals and under what circumstances you acquired them." Connor looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't expected. Genuine curiosity rather than bureaucratic hostility. He made a split-second decision to trust her with the truth. "I found Bruno 6 months ago as a tiny cub. His mother was nowhere to be found, and he was dying. I couldn't just leave him there." Connor's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "The dogs adopted him immediately. He's never known life in the wild. To him, this is his family." Officer Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "And the mother bear?" "She showed up today for the first time. I think she's been injured and was unable to care for him. Look at her leg. She's been caught in a trap or something similar." Jessica Brooks, overhearing the conversation, moved closer with her microphone. "Officer Mitchell, what's your assessment of this situation? Are these animals dangerous?" Before Officer Mitchell could answer, something unexpected happened that changed everything. A small plane appeared overhead, circling low over the clearing. Connor recognized the distinctive markings. It was Dr. Amanda Hayes, a wildlife veterinarian who ran a rehabilitation center 50 miles away. The plane waggled its wings before disappearing toward what Connor knew was a small airstrip about 10 minutes away by car. Within minutes, they could hear another vehicle approaching through the forest. Dr. Hayes arrived in a battered pickup truck loaded with veterinary equipment. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the weathered hands of someone who had spent her life working with wild animals. "I heard the radio chatter about injured animals and bears," she announced as she climbed out of her truck. "Thought you might need a vet." But when she saw the scene in the clearing, her professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Well, I'll be damned. Is that a bear sitting like a dog?" Bruno, hearing a new voice, approached Dr. Hayes with the same friendly curiosity he showed all visitors. When she knelt down to examine his injuries from the wolf fight, he remained perfectly still, allowing her to clean his wounds with antiseptic. "This is remarkable, Doctor," Hayes murmured as she worked. "His behavior is completely domesticated. He's responding to handling like a well-trained dog." She moved on to examine Bruno's mother, who was much warier but seemed to understand that the human was trying to help. "This female has an old snare injury that's healed poorly. She's been surviving on limited mobility for months." Officer Mitchell watched the veterinarian work with growing fascination. "Dr. Hayes, in your professional opinion, do these bears pose a threat to public safety?" Dr. Hayes looked up from bandaging the mother bear's leg. "The young one? Absolutely not. He's been socialized to humans and dogs. He has no aggressive tendencies that I can detect. The mother is wild, but she's focused entirely on protecting her cub, not attacking humans." Jessica Brooks saw her opportunity and stepped forward with her camera crew. "Doctor Hayes, you're saying that this bear has essentially been domesticated by dogs?" "I'm saying that this young bear has undergone a socialization process that's unprecedented in my experience. He's learned canine behavior patterns and integrated them with his natural bear instincts in ways that shouldn't be possible." The crowd was growing larger as more officials arrived, but something else was happening too. Connor noticed that several of the law enforcement officers were lowering their weapons and actually watching Bruno with fascination rather than fear. Deputy Martinez, a young officer who had been tense when he first arrived, found himself smiling as Bruno played with a stick alongside the three dogs. He really does think he's a dog, doesn't he? But the peaceful moment was shattered by the arrival of someone Connor had hoped never to see. A black SUV pulled up, and out stepped Agent Richard Stone from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Stone was known throughout the region as a by-the-book enforcer who showed no mercy when it came to wildlife violations. Agent Stone surveyed the scene with cold, calculating eyes. "I want those bears tranquilized and removed immediately. This is a clear violation of federal law regarding the possession of dangerous wildlife." "Agent Stone," Officer Mitchell began, "perhaps we should evaluate the situation more carefully before—" "There's nothing to evaluate, Mitchell. Bears are not pets. They belong in the wild or in authorized facilities. End of discussion." Stone signaled to his team, who began unpacking tranquilizer equipment. Connor felt his world collapsing as he realized that no amount of evidence or testimony would change this man's mind. But Bruno, sensing the hostile intent of the newcomers, did something that shocked everyone present. He walked directly to Agent Stone and lay down at his feet, rolling onto his back in the universal canine gesture of submission and trust. The clearing fell silent as everyone stared at the young bear exposing his vulnerable belly to a man who intended to take him away from everything he had ever known. It was an act of such innocent trust that even Agent Stone hesitated. Jessica Brooks whispered urgently to her cameraman, "Are you getting this? This is going to be the story of the year." And that's when Connor realized that maybe, just maybe, Bruno himself had found the key to saving their family. The young bear's simple act of trust was about to touch hearts around the world, and public opinion might prove more powerful than government regulations. But Agent Stone was already reaching for his tranquilizer gun, and Connor knew that they were running out of time. The next few minutes would determine whether Bruno spent the rest of his life in captivity or somehow found a way to stay with the only family he had ever known. As Agent Stone raised the tranquilizer gun, Bruno remained on his back, his tail wagging slightly as he looked up at the man with complete trust. The sight was so heartbreaking that several of the officers shifted uncomfortably, their professional detachment cracking under the weight of what they were witnessing. "Stone, wait!" Sheriff Bradley called out, his voice carrying an authority that made the federal agent pause. Before you do anything irreversible, there's something you need to know. Stone's finger hovered over the trigger, his jaw set with determination. Sheriff, I don't care what sob story you're about to tell me. The law is the law. This isn't about the law, Bradley replied, pulling out his phone. This is about politics. That news crew has been broadcasting live for the past 20 minutes. This story is already trending on social media. Connor felt a spark of hope as he realized what the sheriff was implying. In today's connected world, public opinion could sometimes override bureaucratic decision-making, especially when it came to heartwarming animal stories. Jessica Brooks stepped forward, her microphone extended toward Agent Stone. Agent Stone, millions of people are watching this story unfold. How do you justify separating a bear from the dogs who raised him, especially after they all fought together to protect human lives? Stone's face flushed with anger. I don't justify anything to the media. I enforce federal wildlife regulations. But as he spoke, his phone began buzzing with incoming calls. Connor watched as Stone's expression changed from confident authority to growing concern as he looked at his phone screen. Dr. Hayes, who had been quietly observing the standoff, stepped forward. Agent Stone, I'd like to propose an alternative solution. There is no alternative, Stone snapped, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Actually, there is, Dr. Hayes continued calmly. Under federal regulation 50 CFR 17.21, there are provisions for educational and scientific permits that allow for the care of wildlife in extraordinary circumstances. Connor felt his heart leap with hope. He had heard of such permits but never imagined they might apply to his situation. Officer Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. Dr. Hayes is right. If Bruno's case can be classified as an educational or research opportunity, there might be legal pathways to allow him to remain with his adoptive family. Stone lowered his tranquilizer gun slightly, his expression troubled. The paperwork alone would take months, and there's no guarantee the permits would be approved. That's when something extraordinary happened. A new voice joined the conversation, one that made everyone turn in surprise. Agent Stone, I believe there might be a solution that satisfies everyone involved. The speaker was an elderly man who had approached so quietly that no one had noticed his arrival. He was dressed in a simple flannel shirt and jeans, but there was something about his bearing that commanded respect. Sheriff Bradley's eyes widened with recognition. Doctor? William Hartley? What are you doing here? Connor felt his jaw drop. Dr. William Hartley was a legend in wildlife conservation circles. He had written the definitive textbook on animal behavior and had served as an advisor to the National Park Service for over 30 years. Dr. Hartley smiled warmly at the sheriff. I heard about this situation on the radio and couldn't resist coming to see for myself. What I've witnessed here today is unprecedented in the scientific literature. He approached Bruno, who was still lying on his back at Agent Stone's feet. May I? He asked, extending his hand toward the young bear. Bruno immediately rolled over and approached Dr. Hartley with the same friendly curiosity he showed everyone. When the elderly scientist knelt down, Bruno sat and offered his paw, just as Connor had taught him. Remarkable, Dr. Hartley murmured, examining Bruno's behavior with the keen eye of a professional. The integration of canine social behaviors with ursine instincts is something that could revolutionize our understanding of animal psychology. Agent Stone found himself listening despite his initial resistance. Dr. Hartley, with all due respect, this doesn't change the legal facts of the case. Actually, it does, Dr. Hartley replied, standing up and brushing dirt from his knees. I've been authorized by the University of Montana to offer Mr. Adams a position as a research assistant in a long-term study of interspecies socialization. Connor's heart began to race. What does that mean? It means that Bruno and his family would become part of an official scientific study. You would receive the necessary permits to keep him, and your property would be designated as a research facility. Jessica Brooks practically vibrated with excitement as she realized the implications. This could be the first officially recognized case of a bear being raised by dogs in a controlled environment. Dr. Hartley nodded. The scientific value of this situation cannot be overstated. Bruno represents a unique opportunity to study learned behaviors across species lines. But Agent Stone wasn't ready to give up his authority so easily. Dr. Hartley, even if the university backs this study, there are still safety concerns. That mother bear is completely wild. As if summoned by his words, Bruno's mother chose that moment to approach the group. She had been watching from a distance while Dr. Hayes treated her injured leg, but now she walked slowly toward her cub. The crowd tensed, but what happened next surprised everyone. Bruno's mother approached Dr. Hartley and, after sniffing him carefully, sat down beside her cub. Her posture was wary, but not aggressive. "She's protective, but not hostile," Dr. Hartley observed. "With proper rehabilitation for her injury and gradual socialization, she could potentially be integrated into the study as well." Dr. Hayes nodded enthusiastically. "I've been working with injured bears for 20 years. Her wound is healing well, and her behavior suggests she's intelligent enough to adapt to a research environment." Connor felt tears of relief threatening to overflow. "You mean they could both stay?" "Under strict conditions," Dr. Hartley clarified. "The property would need to be modified to meet research facility standards. There would be regular inspections, detailed behavioral documentation, and strict protocols for public interaction." Agent Stone's phone buzzed again, and this time he answered it. Connor watched as his expression grew increasingly troubled during the brief conversation. "That was my supervisor," Stone said after hanging up. "Apparently, this story has reached the national news. The director wants a full briefing on the situation before any action is taken." Sheriff Bradley couldn't hide his satisfaction. "Sounds like the decision is out of your hands, Agent Stone." But their moment of triumph was interrupted by an unexpected complication. A second news van had arrived, followed by what appeared to be protesters carrying signs that Connor couldn't quite read from his distance. Jessica Brooks frowned as she watched the new arrivals. "Those aren't animal rights activists. They look like—" Her voice trailed off as the signs became visible. "Dangerous predators don't belong in neighborhoods," and "protect our children from wild animals" were some of the more visible messages. Connor's heart sank as he realized that not everyone would see Bruno's story as heartwarming. Some people would view the young bear as a threat, regardless of his gentle nature. The leader of the protesters, a woman in her 40s with a severe expression, approached the group with a megaphone. "My name is Margaret Stevenson, and I represent the Coalition for Public Safety. We demand that these dangerous animals be removed immediately." Bruno, confused by the shouting and negative energy, pressed closer to Connor's legs. Rex, Bella, and Max formed their usual protective circle around their adopted brother, sensing the hostility even if they didn't understand its source. Dr. Hartley stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Ms. Stevenson, I understand your concerns, but I assure you that these animals pose no threat to public safety." "That's what they said about the tiger that mauled a child in Ohio," Stevenson shot back. "Wild animals are unpredictable no matter how tame they appear." The confrontation was escalating, and Connor could see that Agent Stone was beginning to reconsider his position. The federal agent was clearly weighing the political ramifications of leaving potentially dangerous animals in a residential area against the scientific value of the research opportunity. That's when Bruno did something that once again changed the entire dynamic of the situation. The young bear, sensing the tension and fear in the air, walked directly to Margaret Stevenson and sat down in front of her. The protest leader stepped back nervously, her megaphone wavering in her grip. Bruno looked up at her with his characteristic head tilt, then slowly lay down and rolled onto his back, exposing his belly in the universal gesture of submission and trust. The clearing fell silent as everyone watched the young bear's innocent attempt to make friends with someone who viewed him as a monster. Even Margaret Stevenson's hard expression softened slightly as she stared down at the vulnerable animal. "He's trying to show you that he's not dangerous," Connor said quietly. "He doesn't understand why you're afraid of him." But the tender moment was shattered by the arrival of another vehicle, a large truck with Animal Control painted on its side. Connor's hope began to crumble as he realized that the authorities were still preparing to remove Bruno, regardless of the scientific arguments or public sentiment. 2 Animal Control officers emerged from the truck, carrying heavy-duty cages and tranquilizer equipment. Their arrival sent a clear message. The debate was over, and Bruno was going to be taken away. The 3 dogs immediately sensed the threat and began barking frantically, positioning themselves between the Animal Control officers and Bruno. The young bear, finally understanding that these humans meant to separate him from his family, let out a distressed whine that cut through everyone's heart. But just as the situation seemed hopeless, Dr. Hartley's phone rang. He answered it quickly, his face lighting up as he listened to the caller. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the crowd, "I've just received word from the governor's office. Due to the unique nature of this situation and the significant scientific value it represents, the state is prepared to issue an emergency research permit." Agent Stone's face went pale. "The governor doesn't have the authority to override federal wildlife regulations." "Actually, he does," Dr. Hartley replied with a smile. "Under the Endangered Species Act, states can issue permits for scientific research that serves the public interest, and this case has definitely captured the public's attention." Connor felt a surge of hope, but he knew the battle wasn't over yet. The Animal Control officers were still moving toward Bruno with their equipment, and Margaret Stevenson was rallying her protesters for another confrontation. The next few minutes would determine whether love, science, and public opinion could triumph over fear and bureaucracy. Bruno's fate hung in the balance, and Connor prepared to fight for his family with everything he had. As the Animal Control officers approached with their tranquilizer equipment, something unexpected happened that would change everything. Bruno's mother, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, suddenly stood up and positioned herself between the officers and her cub. But instead of showing aggression, she did something that left everyone speechless. The massive bear sat down and slowly, deliberately, offered her paw to the lead Animal Control officer, mimicking the behavior she had watched her cub perform dozens of times. The gesture was so human-like, so filled with intelligence and trust, that the officer actually took a step back in amazement. "Did that wild bear just try to shake hands with me?" Officer Martinez whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Dr. Hartley's eyes widened with professional excitement. She's been learning from watching Bruno interact with humans. This is unprecedented behavioral adaptation in real time. The moment of awe was broken by the sound of more vehicles arriving. But these weren't government officials or protesters. A caravan of cars and trucks was pulling up, filled with people Connor recognized from town. His neighbors, local business owners, and families he had known for years. Sarah Chen, who ran the local diner, stepped forward as the unofficial spokesperson for the group. "Connor, we saw the news coverage. We're here to support you and Bruno." More people kept arriving, creating a human barrier between the animal control officers and Bruno's family. Connor felt his throat tighten with emotion as he realized his entire community had come to stand with him. Old Pete Miller, a rancher who had been Connor's neighbor for 15 years, approached Agent Stone directly. "Son, I've lived in these mountains my whole life, and I've never seen anything like what those animals did today. They saved human lives. That counts for something." Margaret Stevenson tried to rally her protesters, but they were vastly outnumbered by the supporters who had arrived. Her voice cracked as she shouted into her megaphone, "You're all making a terrible mistake. These animals are dangerous." That's when 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, Deputy Martinez's daughter, broke away from her father and walked straight to Bruno. The crowd held its breath as the little girl approached the young bear without fear. "Emma, no!" Deputy Martinez called out, but his daughter was already kneeling beside Bruno, who had immediately laid down to make himself less intimidating to the small human. "He's just like our dog Max," Emma said simply, scratching behind Bruno's ears. "He's not scary, he's just big." The image of the little girl petting the gentle bear while his dog sibling sat calmly beside them was so powerful that even Margaret Stevenson's protesters began lowering their signs. Several of them were wiping tears from their eyes. Agent Stone stood frozen, his tranquilizer gun at his side, as he watched the scene unfold. His phone was ringing constantly now, but he ignored it. For the first time in his career, he was seeing a situation that didn't fit neatly into any regulation or protocol. Dr. Hartley seized the moment. "Agent Stone, I'm prepared to stake my professional reputation on this family. The scientific value of this situation is immeasurable, and the public safety risk is minimal." Jessica Brooks, still broadcasting live, turned to her camera. "What we're witnessing here is something that challenges everything we thought we knew about the relationship between humans and wild animals. This bear, raised by dogs, has learned to bridge two worlds in a way that's never been documented before." Sheriff Bradley stepped forward and placed his hand on Agent Stone's shoulder. "Rich, I've known Connor for 10 years. He's not reckless. If he says these animals are safe, I believe him." Agent Stone looked around at the crowd of supporters, the little girl still petting Bruno, the scientific experts vouching for the family's safety, and the wild mother bear who had learned to shake hands. His rigid certainty began to crack. "The regulations are clear," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sometimes regulations need to be interpreted with wisdom." Dr. Hartley replied gently, "This is one of those times." Connor, sensing that the tide was turning, made one final plea. "Agent Stone, 6 months ago I found a dying cub and gave him a chance at life. He's never hurt anyone. He's learned to love and be loved. Isn't that worth something?" Bruno, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, approached Agent Stone one more time. But instead of lying down or offering his paw, he did something that brought tears to even the most hardened eyes in the crowd. The young bear gently nuzzled Agent Stone's hand, then walked back to his family, Connor, Rex, Bella, Max, and now his mother, and sat down among them. His message was clear. This was where he belonged. Agent Stone stared at his hand where Bruno had touched him, then looked at his phone as it rang again. This time, he answered it. "Yes, sir, I understand. Yes, the situation is unique." He listened for several minutes, his expression unreadable. "Yes, sir, I'll implement the new directive immediately." When he hung up, Agent Stone holstered his tranquilizer gun and addressed the crowd. "I've just received word from Washington. Due to the extraordinary circumstances and significant public interest, the Department of Fish and Wildlife is prepared to issue a provisional permit for this research study. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Agent Stone held up his hand for silence. This permit comes with strict conditions. The property must be secured, the animals must receive regular veterinary care, and there will be ongoing monitoring by federal wildlife experts. Connor felt his knees go weak with relief. "You mean they can stay?" "They can stay," Agent Stone confirmed. And for the first time, Connor saw him smile. "But Mr. Adams, you're about to become the most closely watched man in wildlife conservation history." Dr. Hartley stepped forward with a thick folder of documents. "I've taken the liberty of preparing the paperwork for the research facility designation. With your permission, Connor, I'd like to establish the Bruno Adams Institute for Interspecies Behavioral Studies." Connor laughed through his tears. "You want to name it after him?" "After all of them," Dr. Hartley corrected. "Bruno, Rex, Bella, Max, and their mother, who I think we should call Hope, considering what she represents." As the sun began to set over the mountains, Connor looked at his extraordinary family. Bruno was playing with a stick alongside the 3 dogs, while Hope watched from nearby, her injured leg already looking better thanks to Dr. Hayes's treatment. Jessica Brooks concluded her broadcast with words that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. "Today, in a small clearing in the mountains, we witnessed something miraculous. We saw that love truly has no boundaries, that family is defined not by species but by loyalty, and that sometimes the most unexpected bonds can teach us the most about what it means to be human." Margaret Stevenson, her protest signs abandoned, approached Connor hesitantly. "Mr. Adams, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your bear." Connor smiled and extended his hand to her. "Would you like to meet him properly?" As the crowd began to disperse, Connor sat on his porch steps with his 5 animals around him. Bruno leaned against his side, just as he had done as a tiny cub. Rex, Bella, and Max were sprawled in their usual pile, while Hope kept watch from nearby. The young bear looked up at Connor with eyes full of trust and love, and Connor realized that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles come in the most unexpected packages. Bruno had taught them all that family isn't about similarity. It's about choosing to love and protect each other, no matter how different you might be. In the distance, Connor could see construction crews already arriving to begin building the research facility that would allow his family to stay together forever. The Bruno Adams Institute for Interspecies Behavioral Studies would become a place where scientists from around the world would come to study the remarkable bond between a bear who thought he was a dog and the family who loved him exactly as he was. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Connor whispered to his sleeping animals, "We made it. We're going to be okay." Bruno's tail thumped once against the porch, his way of saying he agreed. Their story had shocked the world, but more importantly, it had proven that love truly can conquer all, even the barriers between species, the weight of bureaucracy, and the fear of the unknown. The bear, who thought he was a dog, had found his way home, and in doing so, had shown the world that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that don't make sense to anyone else, but work perfectly for those who matter most.